No, you do.
Hello. Thank you for your nice presentation. Another question. When we're talking about Agile, mainly we're thinking about satisfying the customer's needs. And we're talking about UX, thinking about user experience and like user-centered design. So when do you involve user project when you're thinking about UX and Agile?
Wants to take this one? I'll take it.
So, in case anyone didn't hear, because I think it was quite quiet, the question was if Agile is centered around delivering value to the customer and UX is about delivering value to the user, where do you involve the user in the Agile process? And the answer is as early as possible. If the business is... Can we do anything about this projector? Right in my eyes.
We can stop it. You know what?
Does anyone just move to one side?
You remember the process I went through by which companies decide what it is they want to build and they formulate their assumptions about what the product will be. The earlier you can get user insight in there so that their assumptions actually align with reality is far better. Okay.
I'll follow on from that.
Yeah, so it's first of all, it's about getting that insight in there as early as possible, as roundly as possible in that planning process. And secondly, it's about ensuring that during the iterative development process, as you validate certain aspects of the product, which are, does it perform as required? Does it meet the business requirements that were embodied in the story? Is it deployable? Does it pass whatever set of tests we have available for it? But also, we engage ourselves back in the process then, and we say, does it work with users? Can we take the build that's been shown in this showcase, stick it in front of users, and find out whether or not, thank you so much, whether or not it actually works?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I tend to work on both sides of the process quite a lot. So in the strategy defining phase and also then in the delivery. And, getting user feedback on your strategy, getting user feedback throughout the development process is absolutely important, because otherwise you don't know that you're making the right thing.
I know there's an ISO definition for user-centered design, so we involve users from the early beginning, like planning and research before, and then we go into the designing on paper, and then we test a couple of times with paper and users before going to development. Before reaching the Agile, it may take like about a year to get to that phase.
Okay.
So my question is about the time. Then you only say UX Agile. So UX is far, forehand before getting to development and Agile one. So it's not like a UX Agile one. It's UX, and then in the Agile one, so we're meeting the proposals, we work together with the Agile team, and again, after launching, we have still the user experience, and we have still the feedback from users and other things, and then we can apply again those. But the point is not UX and Agile, although we're trying to work together, these are two different things in two different timings. Depends on the project itself. But when they get together at the time, then we can have it together. That's my point. That's my point. The question is, based on your experience, when do you apply UX?
So I'd like to take that on, which is a big question about when is the right time for UX. And my point is, the problem needs to be solved to enter the dev room. So if your Agile process takes place in the dev room and is solely a development process or a development way of working, then UX happens ahead. You take as much time as you need to, and they'll have to wait on you. If at certain companies, you have to fit UX in a bigger picture where they want everything to move rapidly, then it's a case by case of defining how can I prove my value as quickly as possible, or how can I prove my value in the best way to make sure that whatever the outcome is, what goes to the developers has been solved. And that's when you start entering lead. You start validating your hypothesis. So whether you do that by paper prototyping, guerrilla testing, whatever the method, the question you should ask is, has this been solved? Is it ready to be developed? And if you need development to solve it, because certain functionalities don't work on paper prototypes, or they may require, technical implementation that's just too heavy, then put your tests in the development process, not as a final product in production quality code, but as part of the process, we need to validate this. Make it work depending on what your problem is. There's no general answer as far as I'm concerned.
I would also challenge the notion that UX has to be one thing and Agile has to be another thing because it's about development. The point of Agile, and really the point of us as users, should be there's two very aligned mottos within those two visions. One of which is, for Agile, working software is the only measure of progress. For us, it's only an experience when a user is experiencing it. So it's not, we have a job and then someone else comes along, takes the results of that job and puts it in front of users. It's a holistic process of creating a digital product. UX is one of the inputs into it. Agile is the process by which you turn those inputs into an output.
Another question?
So you've got Agile, you've got user experience, and I think the other massive word just now is responsive design. That's sort of three buzzwords that get thrown around all over the place. And we're working at a company where you're trying to introduce Agile, you're trying to introduce UX, we've got UX teams being built up. All our clients are wanting responsive design, whether they know what it is or not. How do you convince your clients, your Agile team, that UX is important, and how do you buy the time to make sure that you're getting to do the so you've got your general UX at the start, your general research at the start for the project overall, and then your UX for each of the sprints. How do you convince them? How do you buy that time, and how do you make that happen in an Agile situation?
All right, in an Agile situation. So my talk, which I started off with, was trying to put a value to design. So I think responsive design, I don't think it's a buzzword anymore. I think it's a good, cost-effective way of building a smaller screen, mid-screen, larger screen design with one piece of code. And I think it's very clever for some companies who have that sort of need to do it in a very cost-effective way. It doesn't beat native, experiences in any way. I don't think ever. So I think you need. No, you need. That's why apps are so popular. So.
We'll continue that one outside of those because it's.
No, but I think you need to start at what's the problem they're solving? Does responsive design fit into that problem-solving solution? I also want to answer your question as part of this answer to this question as well. Is Agile and UX, Steve Black talking about custom development, Don Norman talking about user-centred design. You can't have one without the other. You can't be designing software for a customer or a UX.
When?
When? As early as possible, like everyone was saying here, but never, ever not part of the conversation. So, I don't know if I answered your question, but I think I answered yours.
We all know that. We all know that.
Convinced? Metrics?
I find this a really tricky one because to go back to the idea of platonic Agile, if the decision is made that we're delivering this in a responsive fashion, that's featureitis, that's a feature of the website. In fact, it's an implementation detail of the website. The question that should be being asked there is, and I know I'm up in cuckoo land, and I know I've just said this never happens actually in the real world. It should be, how do we deliver the best, or how do we deliver the mobile experience for our users that gives them the match between the level of effort we're willing to put into this process and the level of experience they expect or that they'll respond to. So, in some ways, sir, I reject your question entirely. In others, I completely understand it because, like I say, that's how businesses conceive of products, that's how businesses create products. I really don't have a great answer for you, though. It's a long, slow process. You know how I said I'm completely burnt out on organisational change? Unfortunately, it's a long, slow process of organisational change, but I will say that the key to doing any kind of persuasion of that nature is co-working, giving people ownership of what we produce. Once the stakeholders, once the other people on the team have some ownership of it, they'll begin to defend it. So if you can run a workshop where you ask that question, what's the best way to give a mobile experience on this product? And people settle on responsive as the answer, there you go, you've got your buy-in.
on the part of how do you involve a stakeholder, whether it's for Agile, whether it's for UX, whether it's for everything, you involve somebody by building a rapport and a relationship with them. So you start by engaging with them, you have them come to you or you go to them, and you explain how they are of value to you. Not what the value of UX is, not what the value of Agile is, not what the process is, what is the value of them coming onto the process. If they're a stakeholder, they bring value. They can be a gatekeeper, they can have the power of saying yes or no, they can be in quality control, they can, whatever it is, you explain their value to you. That's a way to start making them feel acknowledged. Somebody who feels acknowledged is much more likely to come and play. And then when they start understanding the value, you start explaining how that value plays in the bigger picture. This may be a long-term process because you build a relationship quite slowly. But if you can reassure the stakeholders or find the people who are of value to your project in ways great or small, even if that value is negative, if somebody has the potential to stop the project or slow you down, they're of value to you. Danger has a value. It's a negative value, but you want to manage it. And you bring them in slowly. It doesn't happen in a day. And it seems that in companies that have applied, from the stories I've heard, you need the support of a very high-level stakeholder. You need in the room. It wasn't the most successful design studios in the universe, far from it. But it succeeded, not in getting good quality ideas, it succeeded in making them understand what's happening, why we're doing it, why we value them, and how they can play as we go on. If you're clear on what you want from people, and you can convey that to them, it's a good start.
Just one thing I'll add to that. Has anyone ever joined a project with a new team and had them go, oh, you're the UX, you're magic? That's a really clear sign that these are people who need some co-working workshops to understand that what we do isn't magic. We make decisions and we put them on paper, and that's it. And once they stop worshipping you, they'll start working with you, they'll start understanding what you're doing. And then what's brilliant is they start doing it themselves, and you can sit back and watch porn.
Thank you. I like the idea of MVP. I just wanted to more accurately answer your question about. There are consequences to change, and it's not like you're starting off at ground zero with no idea where you're going. There is a direction to head at, and I think, if you remove Agile as a word, if you remove Lean Startup as a word, it's all about experimenting with what might be the right idea and then having the flexibility to change. I think having this sort of collaboration, talking together, working together as a team, and having a shared understanding helps in accepting the fact that things might change. And whether or not they do change or not is very much down to politics and whether or not the company or the stakeholders are willing to take the risk. Because I've worked in large organizations before, News Corp, Sky, very risk averse. So even though you can do MVP and rapid prototyping and test it and prove that it's a better idea, and they know it, they may still not do it. So I think the reality of it is, you can prove it's a better idea, it might not become what they end up delivering.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just going back to that notion of organizational change. Change is scary, and the bigger the organization, the longer the process, and the more risk averse usually. There are obviously exceptions to the rule, but it's not something that you're going to solve with one well-curated argument for why Agile or user-centered design or any iterative sort of process is going to be better than the way that they've worked before. But this notion of better outcomes over better deliverables, outputs, because usually it's an output question in the old school world, and I'm sure everyone you're working with has had an experience of where the output actually bombed spectacularly at some point. Starting to talk about outcomes and actually the impact you're having with it can help create that conversation around what value you can add.
Just to say one more thing about organisational change, there's a really nice bit of user insight I can give you here if you do go in and do organisational change in any kind of company, which is any person in a permanent role in a company, when they hear the term organisational change, the first question they ask themselves is, what happens to my job? That's what you're pushing against whenever you try and enable a company in an organisational change way. So that's why it's hard.
I'm okay.
I've got a question just there.
Hello. Sophie, loved your presentation. Agreed with most of it until...
Make it meaty, come on.
No, it's actually a small detail. The Kanban slide. So Kanban, I think, works really well for devs as you build and test and so on. You had UX, then creative, then copy. I know all the copy and creatives that I work with would kill me if they thought that I was creating a UX deliverable, passing it over to creative, they were passing it to copy. Copy would kill me for putting it at the very end of the process. So how do you do that? So personally, I sit next to the creative, next to the copywriter. We're all working very cyclically in a sprint. How do you work through that?
So the secret of the Kanban is that the Kanban is a representation of your process. So that was a representation of my process. And the reason things went for a spin in the UX first is because I received the briefs and I was putting the sanity check onto it. And love my clients, love that team, but I knew more about their website than they did. And I had to first take the briefs and say, yeah, we can do it. No, you can't do that. No, your devs can't do this. You've got another project doing it. So that was the first pass. And then some of the projects went straight into the copy or create, which was copy and creative because they worked together, and I was not PMing them, so I let them organize themselves. So some projects went then straight to them, and I said, there's no UX involved here. I don't need to be there. It's a tweak a banner and change the shade of yellow. Some things needed UX, and then I gave it a spin and then gave it to them. The spin could be wireframe it. More often, it was literally screen grab and annotate. But it was very efficient. So I value Kanban because it helps me keep track of my work. But the Kanban has to work for you. So if your process is, I don't know, creative, then UX, then maybe there's a technical check, then it all goes into copy for full copy. Whatever it is, the Kanban has to be a reflection of your process. And it was a whiteboard because across the time, I had this work for about 9 months. And I changed the columns, I tweaked the columns as I went. One of them disappeared. And the one that stayed empty for quite a while was the done column. I think it took about 3 months for the first post-it to get away from, with the client, into the done. So this was my process. Everybody said, well, make the Kanban work for you if you value having visibility and sharing that visibility of what you're doing with everyone around.
There's nothing that says the swim lanes on the Kanban board have to be vertical either. You can have, if you've got a non-linear process, you can break it into horizontal, and it's can't move up and down.
Oh, swim lanes. Advanced Kanban.
We have one that's a circle and an arrow that goes into the circle. Okay, we're going to have to stop there.
My Kanban board is a climb bar.
Thank you.
4 geeks in the room, cool.
Thank you very much for your interesting and thought-provoking talks. I believe I'm actually becoming a naysayer of Agile, so I'm going to pose a question and make a comment too. In your experience, has anybody, in an Agile environment, especially with analytics involved as well, if have you ever known a company to remove stuff from a website to improve the user experience? And secondly, I believe that Agile plus Analytics has created a culture of short-term changes to make small wins. And I think that Sophie mentioned something about Spotify recognise that they have a problem keeping their UX aligned and that they'll deal with it in the future. I particularly won't deal with it in the future because the company, I did a contract at an e-commerce site and their user interface had got out of control because people kept adding features to the site and nobody was removing to them. So there, for instance, there were 25 versions of the search form. You can only search for one thing, which meant that it slows down design and slowed down development. And so my naysay part is I think where Agile creates a quick development environment, but I believe that we're creating a problem in the long term because we're going to have too many variations of things because different teams are working on things. So the only question I asked is if you've removed things from a website to improve user experience.
Yes, I have. And just to that point, I've worked in really large.coms like Amazon and Yahoo. So in that kind of context, those kind of things can happen. But I want to say, Waterfall did not create a more considered approach to search. So there were already lots and lots of different ways of, different versions of a button, different versions of a search form. Agile didn't create that problem, and Agile by itself, at that small scale, is not going to solve a strategic sort of site-wide.
Can Agile solve the problem?
It can if you're having the right project. If you're saying, okay, search is an issue right now, we need to consolidate our search forms, and that's an Agile project, then of course you can do that.
It's about vision, and I completely agree with your point that an over-focus on analytics, an over-focus on A/B testing leads you to these short-term decisions that damage vision. And I think the big question, and it's a question that's as true of Waterfall as it is of Agile, is how do you protect that vision? Which is one of the reasons that I always say conversation is really powerful. If everyone's pushing towards the same goal, they have the drive to keep it in sync.
And I would say the question is always, in fact, vision, are the small increments getting you closer to your goal? Or are they dilapidating your resources to something else? You can advance by small increments and make progress, and you can have massive releases and land back on the exact same point as in companies say, oh, we need to catch up with the competition, so let's do a massive endeavor. And by the time they've caught up, or so they think, by the time they deliver, whether Agile or Waterfall, well, guess what? The competition does something else. So, but the issue for me in answering this, however, is that this is not a UX or Agile program. This is a company, it's a policy. What do they want? The guy at the top, what does he want to do with his business? And he's the one who's accountable for it.
There's a question.
Yeah, so when you were in
Yeah, can I very quickly answer your question about analytics removing something? So, business service and analytics. So I used to work for Sky. And I don't know if you guys know the Sky.com website. Used to have a big MPU ad on there, which is no longer there. I used to make Sky over £1 million a year. So there was an executive decision to remove it because people were wondering why is there an MPU ad? In the space there could be more personalised, utilized space. So getting rid of £1 million a year was actually very good. It was based on research, but it was what we ended up having to do was focus on actually improving marketing products to customers in order to upsell to them. So I think, big companies do take the risk sometimes. In fact, they're actually making more money now because it removes that ad. So that's good. But and to your point, another example, just a small example. So I also worked at News Corp, and we were working on the Sun iPad app. There was some stories and features, outputs to do with creating a home screen help screen, because it was a relatively new app. But the thing with the home screen help app screen was that it was defunct because it was actually highlighting flaws in the experience further down when users were using the iPad app. We fixed those problems, which meant that there's no longer home screen help section needed. I think there are really good wins for UX if we can actually just keep,
Being smart.
in there and making the right decisions.
So my question is, when you're in an agency, like client-agency relationship, usually you've signed a contract, you've got like a statement of work that says you need to deliver something for a certain date. Is that not like incompatible with Agile?
Completely. I've just come out of 2 projects which were sold to the client as Agile. Major mistake. Big, costly mistake. Because we undertook Agile as in, ooh, you want a hell of a lot of things. How about we see what we can get you? We're going to work really, really hard, all of us, and we're going to get you the best we can get you with the money you have. How about that? Does that sound good? Client, yeah. What the client was hearing is, you're going to give me everything that I'm telling you. And we had an inflated backlog, and I ended up having meetings 9 months down the line with a client where showing them wireframes for the 4th sprint, and I present something, the client says, oh, we're going to need a really complex store locator because we want people to find stores with this functionalities, with this person, this assistant, with that thing. I'm like, well, this wasn't in the backlog, so we're going to have to look at it. And says, well, I'm adding it to the backlog now. Anyway, the backlog doesn't count. Well, I love the little hand gesture. It was French. It was such, the backlog doesn't count. And I said, well, I'll go back to the units that sounds good. Very dangerous. I've worked on other projects where the client's expectations were much, much better managed, and it was all out. You have a team, you have the time, we'll do whatever we can. You can come anytime to see what we're doing. You have regularly, we're releasing stuff, we're showing you stuff, and when you want to pull the plug, you want to pull the plug. But that was a very long-term engagement. So it really, really depends how it's sold to the client. I've seen it work very well, and I've seen it work atrociously badly, where the agency went very deeply out of pocket.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing people that fixed scope, fixed cost, fixed delivery time is possible, which is essentially what a statement of work says. It's a triangle. You can pull on any one side of it, but that'll make the other 2 sides shorter. So I was having this conversation. I'm also a proximity at the moment. I was having this conversation with one of our account managers recently, where we were putting together a statement of work, and I said, you do realise that when you put together a fixed scope, fixed price contract, what essentially happens is the 2 parties sit down, face each other, and says, one of us is going to fuck the other one, and I really hope it's going to be fucking you. Because either, if I'm the client, I'm hoping that I'll get everything I've asked for this sum that I've negotiated down, or if I'm the agency, I'm hoping I can cut corners, deliver cheaper, and make extra profit. Because one of us is going to win over the other one. I should point out that the account manager was very, very clear that is not how we do things at proximity. We negotiate on an extremely fair basis. But you can add contingency, but contingency goes in at 10%, contingency goes in at 20%. Change is not predictable in that way. Business change, especially in a digital world in the middle of a recession, you can't say there's going to be 20% difference between now and then. Who knows how much difference there's going to be? So I recognise the need, and I recognise the business realities behind fixed price, fixed scope, fixed delivery. And I think it's an absolutely horrible process that unfortunately we have to live with. And yes, it makes Agile extremely difficult because it removes room for experimentation. If you know there's a cheap and dirty way of doing something, it forces you to use the cheap and dirty way.
Okay, we've got time for 3 more questions, I think. 2 down there.
Okay, so it sounds like you've all been in very different environments. I hear agency settings, big companies, and freelance embedded in companies. And with the risk of James' hair falling out, I think one of the recurring themes is kind of this change in culture and organization. I assume most people here are kind of in a UX or similar position. I think it's usually pretty easy to kind of introduce Agile in later stages of the waterfall, so to speak. So where you kind of have, like Agile development, design, collaboration with, design, UX, and everything down the line. How can you kind of bump it up further up the waterfall? Like, how can you? I don't know. How do you do that from your position?
Become a UX San. Leap up the waterfall. Anyone?
Yes.
Hang on.
I love that response because it was very quick and we're running out of time. Sorry, Simon.
So there you go.
Any quick comments about it?
Why would you do it? So my big question, why, and I'm here, I've had this discussion 2 weeks ago at the London Common Strategy Meetup. When you want to start taking Agile and its philosophy, remember it's a manifesto, it's not a book that somebody stands by. It's this group of developers who said, we believe in these things and we'll try and implement them. There's been books written, but none of them stand out as the Bible. I would question why you would want to bring this philosophy designed by developers, for developers, to answer the very specific problems. What would you try and apply elsewhere? And if you would try to do this, question what are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to get rid of? And what are our goals?
That other part of the cookie.
The other part of the cookie. Everything doesn't have to be Agile. I don't want to see a financial, accounts payable department running Agile. Sorry. Oh, we have no idea when you'll pay you. You'll be on the list, and whenever I get your ticket, you get paid.
I live by Agile to the degree where I'm renovating a Dutch barge at the moment, and when I started building the new bedroom that I slept in last night for the first time, I built it Agile. I went, estimate how much wood I need, start building walls. This is not a metaphor, by the way, this is what I really did. Build as much as I can with the knowledge I have, and it was fantastic up until about 80%. And then I realised I needed to join it. Who came in and laughed in my face? Why'd you do that? Why'd you do that? Why'd you do that? Like Sophie says, there are some processes that Agile isn't really the right way to go about them. But those processes, there are better ways to do them. For instance, if you look at the core of what we've been talking about in Agile tonight, things like collaboration, co-ownership, asking questions, knowing what the team can handle, there is a design process that's based around that. Design thinking will help you enable doing that in your organisation, and that feeds quite nicely into Agile if you define the correct outputs.
Yeah, so Agile is a delivery process. It's not a thinking process up front process. It's not a experimentation process as such. So if you can imagine 3 parts of a process, you've got design thinking, where you're brainstorming, affinity, grouping, and then fine-tuning. And after that, it's lean startup, build, measure, learn. Mm-hmm. And then you could maybe think about getting into Agile. But if you don't get the first 2 bits right, you're only going to be delivering stuff that's... You don't know if it's any good. Mm-hmm. So I think you're right. Different processes, different stages. And to answer your question about UX needs to be right at the design thinking stage, right at the creating the MVP stage, right at the supporting the Agile process in the first stage.
That's great. Unfortunately, we can't have the last 2 questions.
We're running out of time. Can anyone ask a question in 10 seconds? That can be answered in 20 seconds.
Not by me.
Yes.
Go. Sorry.
Do you think it's possible to do Agile remotely with like virtual Kanban boards, lots of Skypes, things like that?
One of you. 20 seconds.
Just say yeah.
Yes.
Well, actually...
Very difficult. Work at it. You will spend a lot of time implementing it before you can actually get down to business.
Yeah, you can, but it's all about to.
Another one. Quick, sorry. So,
Already projects too big for Agile.
any projects too big for Agile?
It depends how big you chew. The product can be big, but how much do you want to change of it? How much time do you give yourself, and how many teams?
Is there anything that's just it's just too big for Agile?
Yeah, building a bedroom on a Dutch barge.
Question.
Can you explain the rise of unicorns?
Unicorn. We're calling UX unicorns this mythical beast where you're an excellent UXer,
you're an excellent front-end developer, and you're an amazing designer. You mastered Photoshop like babies eat porridge, and this fantastic and SQL, and you're on top of all the code. So you're able to undertake all the tasks from the thinking to the designing to the implementing. Businesses love those people. They don't exist very often, and it's a bit of a plague at the moment.
Last one? Okay, right.
Oh, front row press. She's lovely.
Go.
It's very quick. What about training?
Okay, my opinion, 10 seconds, don't do Agile UX until you're an experienced UXer, because you need to know your trade, you need to know your skills. People will test you from the word go. You may say, I'm not right, but you have to know how to check it, and you have to be good. Because you're the only person saving your own skin, and if you can't deliver, you'll be in the deep end. So become a good UXer in every other way. Be really confident, you know the skills, learn a bit about Agile, and then dive in and hold your breath for as long as you can.
Yeah, direction, not specification.
Excellent. So that's it. Can you join me in thanking Eewei, Chen, Sophie Freiermuth?
And thank you Simon for curating this event, and everyone for help from the video, the camera, the sponsor again, and Idri, thank you very much.
The Twitter turned up late.
The Twitter turned up late, okay, thank you.
You got the important
We've got about 15 minutes to finish the drinks at our time, and a minute, we have to finish them, we can't take them.
Shots.
And if we can just rephrase some of the questions we heard tonight,